Shortly after we found out that Melissa was pregnant, I really wanted to be a good husband. And so I had this thought, I would cook a huge meal of her favorite spiced pork. And so I cleaned the whole kitchen and I got all the ingredients, and I was gonna make not just enough for one good meal, but I was gonna make enough that we had leftovers for the next couple days and we could enjoy it. And I was so excited. And so I slaved over this meal for hours, cooking and cleaning and getting everything ready. And I'm so excited. And I call Melissa and she comes into the kitchen and everything is set out. She takes a big whiff of her favorite spiced pork. And it's at that moment, Melissa had the very first food craving of her pregnancy. And it wasn't for spiced pork. And so I get to watch my wife go past this meal that I have slaved over. She walks to the fridge and she pulls out the family size grape package, you know, the one that's like 2.5 pounds. And I watch as I eat spiced pork, I watch as my wife eats about 1.5 pounds of grapes for dinner. Cravings are a powerful thing, right, y'all? Anybody ever experienced cravings before? Yeah. I haven't. I actually got the opposite. I got to eat spiced pork for the next 6 meals, and I was not craving spiced pork for any time soon. Here's the thing, cravings are powerful, and when we have a craving, even when there's something we might naturally want, something else becomes more important. So there are times that I crave coffee, and that's all I can think about. Even if it's hot out and I'm sweaty, I don't care. I need the caffeine. There are times I crave coffee. We crave stuff, and it's not just food. So it's now summer break, and so all of our students have been craving and looking forward to summer. They can't even concentrate the last couple of days of school. There's this craving for summer break, right, Paige? Yeah, that's awesome. Teachers, even more so, are craving summer break, right, Mike? Some of you know what that feels like. You've got a craving. Or maybe it's, summer is vacation time, and you can't wait to go to the mountains or the lake or the beach. You've got this place, maybe it's where family live, and you've got a craving, and you can't even concentrate on anything else because you're thinking about that place. There's a craving to be there. Sometimes our cravings are more deeply held inside. So sometimes it's a craving for just quiet, and you live in a house and everybody's chaotic and everybody's loud, and you would give every dollar in your bank account if they would all just shh for 5 minutes. Melissa lives in that house. Some of you have a craving for quiet. Sometimes we have a craving for companionship, and we're alone and things are too quiet. And maybe somebody left, maybe the kids moved out, but there's a craving that someone else might be there with us. Sometimes we have cravings and we don't even know what they're for. We just know that it feels like something's hollow and missing inside. We all have cravings. We're talking about a time in history in this series where there was a lot of cravings. We're in the middle of a series called Methodism 101, and we're looking at the roots of our Methodist movement and where it comes from and how we got here. And it comes out of a time of intense cravings. It comes out of a time of religious and spiritual cravings. People knew there was more to life than what they had. There was something missing, and they just couldn't quite put their finger on it. So these cravings, they come from somewhere. And in our point in history, we're picking up, we're going to look about 100 years before Methodism starts with this man. Anybody recognize who this guy is off the top of your head? Anybody really good at history? Yeah, who do you got? This is King Henry VIII. Well done. This is Henry VIII, King of England. And he does a lot to lead to some cravings in England. It works like this. When King Henry VIII takes over England, England's a Catholic country. Everybody's Catholic because, well, everybody has to be Catholic. And so when it's Sunday morning, you round up all the kids and you go to Catholic Mass because you're required to do that. King Henry VIII takes over a country where everybody believes the same thing. But Henry really wants to get a divorce. There's a lot of politics that go into that, and the Pope says no. And Henry goes, well, if you won't let me have a divorce, I'm just going to take all of England, and we're no longer going to be Catholic. And so King Henry VIII sends out a message to everybody and says, hey, starting tomorrow, nobody's Catholic anymore. I know you've all been Catholic for like 50 generations, but from here on out, everybody's going to be this new thing called an Anglican. And starting tomorrow, everybody's part of this church. And by the way, I have this really fancy role for the church. It's supreme head on earth of the Church of England. That's a fancy title, Staff Parish. I need a fancier title after that, right? Supreme head on earth of the Church of England. This is Henry VIII. And overnight, everybody has to go from the faith they've known to this new thing that didn't exist the day before. And understandably, some people don't like that. I mean, how many of you would like it if like just one Sunday you show up and the doors are locked and, hey, congratulations, you all starting tomorrow are a Muslim or Jewish or Buddhist? There might be some anxiety there, right? There might be some problems. This is what happens in England, and people push back. And the supreme head on earth of the Church of England doesn't like people pushing back, and so he begins to execute anybody that's too loud. He begins to burn some of them at the stake, seizing property from former Catholic churches. All good Christian actions, right? Yeah. And this is the start of a really tumultuous time in the religious history of England. It touches off a lot of anxiety around belief for a lot of people. They start to wonder, what do we believe and what are we even allowed to believe? Where do we have the freedom to believe? Today is Memorial Day, and we remember the sacrifice of those who came before us who allow us freedom of religion. You want to know why freedom of religion matters so much? Because of this period we're talking about right here. So after Henry VIII, things start to flip-flop back and forth. And every new king, every new leader seems to say, hey, I know you believe this, but you're not allowed to believe that anymore. Now you've got to believe this. And if you don't believe this, then we're going to torture you or kill you. And so after King Henry VIII, eventually, pretty quickly, it passes to Mary I. King Henry VIII is Anglican, he's Protestant. Mary I, his daughter, decides, nope, we're going back to the Catholic Church. And she executes so many Protestant bishops, she gets a name. Anybody remember Mary's nickname? Bloody Mary. Not the drink, the person. This is why she gets the name. She burns, some of you got that joke, she burns so many Anglican bishops at the stake, she gets the name Bloody Mary. So King Henry flips to Bloody Mary. After Bloody Mary, it pretty quickly goes back to Anglican. Elizabeth takes the throne, and she says, no, everybody, you've got to go, and you've got to become Anglicans again. And then after Elizabeth, shortly after that, another person takes the throne, and his name is Oliver Cromwell, and he's a new type of thing. He's a Puritan, and he doesn't like either side, and he oppresses both sides. Back and forth, and back and forth. Within 100 years, it changes the religion in England about 4 different times. Do you start to get whiplash just from thinking about that? If every 25 years or so, everybody was told, no longer can you believe that thing, now you have to believe this thing. And people start to have a lot of fear with religion. I mean, do I want to get too attached to this thought if, in a few years, I might get burned at the stake if I believe it? You start to get skeptical about your friends because, that person's really fired up for faith. Are they going to be the ones that turn me in when religion changes again, back and forth? People start to get a hunger for a faith that's based not on politics, a faith that's not what you're told to believe, but a faith that you actually, truly believe. By the dawning of the 1700s, people start to think the best type of faith is a quiet faith. One that you can switch if you need to. One that doesn't threaten your friends. People start to lose the passion in their singing. They start to lose the hope in their belief. You can imagine the impact of being forced to change your beliefs. The problem is that when faith goes silent, all of those spiritual cravings still remain. We just don't have an answer for them. All of those cravings we wrestle with, like, is there life after death? What happens to my loved ones when they're gone? Why do we have hope? Will the world ever get better than this? All of those cravings remain. In times like that in history, you lose all comfort. I wonder if it echoed a little bit the cravings that gave rise to part of our scripture today, Psalm 108, verse 2. Wake up, harp and lyre. The harp and the lyre, these were 2 instruments that were used in worship thousands of years ago. They were the instruments people would use to worship God, to celebrate God's goodness. And you can hear, wake up, harp and lyre. We need that worship. We need that hope. There are times in history where people cry out and say, God, we need your comfort. We need your peace. We need your truth. And yet, sometimes, it seems like those are a little depressed. The 1700s were a time in history where people had the same cravings, and yet none of the same comforts that we hope for. It was also a time that perhaps was a little worse than most. The 1700s was the start of the Industrial Revolution. I know there's a lot of history here. I promise we're going to get past it pretty quick. There was a lot of factories popping up. This was the Industrial Revolution. And so the average person started moving to towns away from everyone they knew. And their job was to get up every single day and work 14-hour shifts in the same factory or the same mine or the same mill, day after day after day, questioning, is this what life is all about? As their job is take the thing from here, put it here, here to here, again and again and again for 14 hours, 6 days a week. People begin to have this craving for a purpose inside. And like everybody, they start to look for ways to satisfy that craving. Alcohol was a big one. So in England in 1685, there were 500,000 gallons of gin produced in all of England. 500,000 gallons. That sounds like a lot, but when you take it over a whole nation, that's not that much. One generation later, there were 18 million gallons of gin produced in the same area. So just to give you a frame of reference, that's proportionally the difference of going from this to this in one generation. Somebody think they might have had a little problem, right? This is a problem. People are trying to fill the hole in their souls. They've got a craving for purpose. They've got a craving for hope, and yet nothing seems to be taking care of it, and they are drinking themselves to death out of desperation. This is the period in history that all of this starts. And before we go and think that this is just history and it's so different, I want to remind you that we've got our own ways that we fulfill our own cravings. See, after I wrote this sermon, but before today when I give it, I opened the news and this was the story. This is a news headline from 2 days ago. Nebraska police seize record amounts of fentanyl, and nobody's eyes are good enough to read that date, but that's May 25th, 2018. Somebody saw that. Some of you might have seen this. This was in Kearney, Nebraska, just a few hours west of here. Police seized 26 million doses of fentanyl. That's a lot of opioids. It's not just substances, though. I mean, we have a new one to replace the alcohol. It's not just substances. It's Netflix. It's TV. It's any way we can fulfill that craving for a purpose, for hope, for joy in our lives. Some of us are still there. Industrial England was a restless world with a deep craving, just like today. That's the world that shaped our story. It's in that world, one cold December night, 1707, that a young boy is born. His name is Charles Wesley. He's the brother of our founder, John Wesley. And he grew up under his mother's diligent parenting, his father's stern faith. He grew up to believe that God mattered, but also to see that the world was broken. Now, he went pretty quickly to study at Oxford, England, to become a pastor. He was following his father's footsteps, and that's where he discovered that everybody there, they seemed to talk about God, and they knew God brought hope, and they talked about God's peace and grace for all people, and yet it all seemed like head knowledge. It was just up here. And people learned all of these facts about God, but they didn't seem to really believe it inside. And Charles began to wrestle with this reality that some of you have wrestled with, that head knowledge alone isn't enough. If something's just in our minds and not in our hearts, it's not going to be there for us when we need it. It doesn't have the power to impact anything. Charles knew he needed something more. So Charles gets together with some of his friends and his brother, and they begin to read their scriptures every single day, looking not just what does this teach us about God, but what does this teach us about us, and how can we apply this and live this? They begin to take communion every day, and people see this and they notice their fire and their enthusiasm, and they start to wonder. Because remember, how did people feel about those who were really religiously enthusiastic at this period? They're scared. And people see Charles and his brother, and they wonder, are those the fanatics who are going to start the next great purge? They give them a name, Methodists. How silly is it that you could have this method, that you could read the Bible every day and grow in your faith? That's crazy talk. Until it worked. And they found a faith worth living. And these weren't the only people in history that have done it. This is just where our movement comes from. And Charles began to feel something deep inside. He began to feel all the hope that he talked about and learned about in the classroom. He began to feel all the grace and the peace that people longed for, that there was a deep craving for. All of the things we read in our Psalms, Charles began to wrestle with those and internalize those. And then he thought, I think other people need this too. I think other people need to know that God's not just head knowledge, but that God matters to our hearts. And so Charles was a musician, and he began to write songs. Here's a picture of the organ in Charles Wesley's childhood home. Priscilla Wilson and Rich Pearson were kind enough to let me have their photos from their last trip. This is the organ that he might have played. And Charles took that deep theology and love for God, and he began to teach it to people in a way they could understand. He began to write songs so that they could sing these songs and understand God's love. And the thing is, these were songs that people remembered. He wrote them to what we call bar tunes. And people began to internalize and live those. And you know some of these songs. At least I'm hoping you do. Because I'm going to sing the first part, and as soon as you know it, I want you to join in. And if you don't, you're going to hear just how bad of a singer I am. So let's do this one. As soon as you've got it, go with me. Hark the herald angels. The last half of that was a lot prettier than the first half. All right. How about another one? Let's do one more. Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing my... Beautiful. Oh, you can keep going. It's pretty. Bob was going to go all the way. I love it. Here's the thing. These songs, they're hundreds of years old. They were written to answer some of the cravings that people had back then, and some of us have now. Where is God in my life? Not just in theory, not just in a book, not just what does the preacher say on Sunday morning. Where is God for me when it's Tuesday and I can't sleep and I'm exhausted? Where is God when I get that call from my kids and they're in the hospital? Where is God? These were songs written to answer that craving. So I want you to see what they looked like in their first setting. So I'm going to invite you, close your eyes if you would. Close your eyes and imagine something with me. I want you to imagine Monday morning, cold before the dawn starts, in the countryside of England. Imagine a group of guys heading towards a mine, starting a shift that will last until after the sun has set. For the next 6 days, they will not see the sun as they toil below ground. No one talks as these hard-scrabble men head towards yet another day. Some of them trying to shake off the hangover from last night's drinking as they tried fruitlessly to anesthetize themselves from the pain of the week. Imagine as these guys, longing and craving for a meaning for their life, as they walk closer and closer to the depths of the mind. Now, imagine, keep your eyes closed and imagine the impact one solitary voice would have as he sung to himself quietly a song he heard the day before at church, a song written by a man who wanted people like him to understand God loves them and God hears the callings and cries of their heart. I want you to understand the impact of these words.
How long expected Jesus, born to set thy people free from our fears and sins, release us, let us find our rest in Israel's strength and consolation, hope of all the earth thou art, dear desire of every nation, joy of every living.
Joy of every heart. Let us find our rest in thee. You can open your eyes. In the darkness of mines and factories all across this world that was longing and hungering, people would begin to sing these songs about a passion that wasn't just in their head, something that they'd heard, but instead something they felt. And voices like that would resonate in the darkness, and people began to hear a message like our scripture, which thousands of years before had written, saying, "My heart is unwavering, God. I will sing and make music, yes, with my whole being." Joy of every longing heart. My heart is unwavering. unwavering against the darkness, unwavering against the loneliness, unwavering against the brokenness that comes from doing the same thing day after day and wondering, what is my purpose and why was I made and why am I here? See, Charles Wesley wrote music. He wasn't the first to do that. We read from the Psalms today. That was worship music written thousands of years ago. Music written to lead people as they worshiped God. To say, God, we glorify you and we magnify you for who you are. Songs written to remind us this is who God is. This is what God does in us. Music is one of the ways we worship. It's not the only way. But Charles Wesley knew the power of a song to unite our heads and our hearts, to take all of the things that we've learned or heard or half remember and bring them home for us, that we might walk with power knowing the glory of God. Worship combines the strength of our minds with the power of our hearts, and it unites and fills the cravings of our souls. This is why we sing. Every single Sunday, about half of what we'll do will be music. And it's beautiful and it's powerful and it glorifies God and it says, God, we love you this much. It also reminds us of who God is. And here's what I know. 3 weeks from now, you won't remember my words today, and that's okay. But 300 years from now, people will still be singing that song that Mike sung. 300 years, maybe 3,000 years from now, if we look at the Psalms as any precedent, people will still be singing about the glory of God because something becomes powerful and real to us when we put our faith to music. Our movement started in a time when people were afraid of that enthusiasm, when they were afraid that people might become passionate, and yet it started changing hearts. And people began to realize that this was not something to be afraid of as long as it was in line with the God of love. And they walked out and they began to sing powerfully, God is our refuge, God is our strength. And their lives became changed. This is power when our heads and our hearts meet. Now, this is part of why we worship every Sunday. And I'll be honest, I'm spoiled. I get to do it twice, every single Sunday. And I get the beauty of our traditional service. And I'm missing our choir today. I think that y'all should go through the summer. That's just because I like y'all. You're beautiful. I also get it from our contemporary band. And they're incredible. And they're so talented. And sometimes I'm spoiled. And I get that at home. Melissa has a voice that I love to hear, and it's not just because I'm her husband. It's beautiful. There was a Sunday evening a couple weeks ago where I got home, and I needed worship. There was that craving deep inside. Where is God in the middle of my week? And some of you know this, but sometimes we're just fried inside. Anybody ever feel that? And you just need something to pick you back up. And so a couple weeks ago on Sunday, I'd preached a sermon that just hadn't gone quite the way I'd wanted, and I hadn't known it as well as I'd wanted, and it just hadn't started well, and just by halfway through the sermon, it's one of those things, no preacher would ever say this, but I might have prayed, hey, God, please just help me survive. Just help me hold on, right? And by the time I get home Sunday night, I'm so frustrated with how it had gone, and I just collapse in this chair in my home office, and it's like, all right, what was the point? See, here's the thing, I'm a pastor, and so when I mess up a sermon, it doesn't feel like I just did my job wrong, like I missed a chance for somebody to understand God's love. And I was feeling just really low and really broken and really drowning. And it's in that moment that I hear in another part of our house, I hear some notes start. And Melissa's got a piano in a different part of our house. And I hear as she starts to play. And she starts to play this song, this worship song, and then she starts to sing, and she starts to sing these lyrics. Many of you might actually know this song, where feet may fail and fear surrounds me, you've never failed, and you won't start now. So I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace, for I am yours and you are mine. That Sunday I'd talked about how God is unfailing. And I knew it up here. I could have talked for an hour without notes about how God never fails us and God will never leave us. And you know what? Sitting in my chair in my office at home, I felt like I'd failed God and like God didn't care. And like God wasn't there for me. Like I was all alone. There was this disconnect between what I knew in my head and what I felt in my heart. And I believe that we all get there sometimes. And it leaves us with a craving. It leaves us with a craving to feel deeply the promises of God. As Melissa began to sing those words, I'm not a real emotional guy, but I started to feel something powerful. And it was like waves of that promise, waves of that grace were washing over me as I was reminded once again in a real way that God never fails us, that God will never and can never fail us and will never and can never stop loving us. And that even though I wasn't happy about my sermon, that God still is happy with each of us. And I began to feel that grace, and what I knew in my head began to break through into my heart. There's power in worship. We need it because it takes what's up here and moves it down to here and gives us strength to go out there and change the world with the power of God's love. Melissa.
You call me out upon the waters, the great unknown, where feet may fail. And there I find you in the mystery, in oceans deep, my faith will stand. And I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace, for I am yours and you are mine. Your grace abounds in deepest waters. Your sovereign hand will be my guide. Where feet may fail and fear surrounds me, you've never failed and you won't start now. So I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace, for I am yours and you are mine. Oh, Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. And I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace, for I am yours, and you are